Albanese government's record on national security does little to inspire confidence. Just recently, they've expelled intelligence chiefs from the National Security Committee of Cabinet, and there's growing fears a major strategic policy institute, which is properly critical of China, could be abolished. The immigration detainee debacle, well, that's been dragging on since last year, and two groups of asylum seekers have somehow managed to land undetected in WA last month. Not to mention that legislative mess that I've just discussed with Dan at TN. These are worrying times for our region, so why is Labor appearing to dismantle many of the security protocols established in the past that to date have kept Australians safe? Joining me now, former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson. John, thank you for your time. I mentioned briefly there the two intelligence chiefs, the head of ASIO, our domestic spy agency, and ASIS, our foreign intelligence service. Both of them have been thrown out of the National Security Committee of Cabinet, and in their place, there's now the Climate Change Minister, and he's Departmental Secretary. Now, as a former Deputy Prime Minister, you sat in on the NSC. What do you make of this change?
This is chilling, frankly, and I don't say that lightly. I say out of concern for yours and my country and our viewers. This is extremely serious stuff. Our security agencies have done a remarkable job in this country of keeping us safe. It's a bit like eyesight. It's not until it goes wrong that you realise that you've made a mess of things. And we're now putting our machinery that's been so effective at keeping us safe and so effective at exposing bad policy, including in defence, frankly, we're putting it at risk. And I find that absolutely amazing. You too have sat in on those National Security Cabinet Committee meetings. You know how critical they are. And to not have the people who are most likely to have astute observations to make about potential terrorist acts within our country or without, present in the room when you're discussing the safety of the Australian people, the number one responsibility of the Prime Minister and the government of the day, beggars the imagination, Peter. It beggars the imagination.
What I tried to explain when I discussed this the other day, John, is the contestability that they provide when they're in the room. And I mean that if they're not in the room, ministers like you would get a briefing. I mean, I tell people at home, these could run to 30 pages. You read the briefing, you've got questions, but you throw it around in the room to people, the experts, who are not there to answer the questions. Now, yes, you could bring them up from the department. That may or may not happen. But to have them in the room and for them to challenge the advice of other experts, I think means the decision makers, which are the politicians, not the public servants, they get the best chance for all the arguments to be robustly tested. Without them in the room, that's what we're missing.
Absolutely. And now we've got a review into ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Initiative. Now, I should disclose two things. I was there when we set it up. Why did we set it up? We set it up because we believe that quite often the defence bureaucrats, and frankly, sometimes the brass, were telling us what we wanted to hear or what they thought we wanted to hear rather than what we needed to hear. We wanted contestability. The second thing I should say to you is that I'm currently on the council of ASPI. Now, it's been a very important body. There's a review into it. But what's really concerning is the government's got itself into a terrible pickle here. It has a tin ear. It should have realised what was going to happen when they called a review. You now have deeply informed people around the place, from the Australian, from independent news sources, indeed from Labor supporters saying this is because the government isn't too keen on having that contestable advice, exposing what our defence forces are doing right and what they're not doing right, what China's up to, what other foes are up to. They're not too keen on having that stuff. Now, that may or may not be right. We don't know what the review will recommend, but the fact is that the government's got a tin ear. It should have realised that immediately people are saying, oh, hello, this is one of the 14 grievances that China's listed. They don't like this particular think tank that is really the government's property and therefore the Australian people's property, and they're going to wind it back. The government's got a terrible problem here because any diminution now, perceived or real, in the willingness to support ASPI and take on board its advice will be seen as selling out the Australian interest. It will be welcomed by those who oppose Australia, and it will be met with despair by people who respect ASPI internationally, including the Americans, I might add.
Very powerfully said, John Anderson. Thank you.